Hi there, my name is Bishakha, and a funny thing happened to me a few years back. I was traveling in the United States where my surname Datta is commonly mispronounced Datta. So this lawyer comes up to me and says, "Oh, your surname is so now, so on trend, you know. If we just removed one alphabet, it would be data, or as we call it, data." I gaped at him in a foolish manner, literally speechless, mainly because I didn't realize surnames fell into the list of things that could be considered hip or trendy or contemporary. But anyway, you see, what does it tell us about the way we think about data nowadays? So I didn't know this then, but the word data is actually the plural of the Latin word datum, which means a piece of information. So the way it's used is like this. That fact is a datum worth taking into account. Today, of course, we'd say that's an interesting data point, but that is not actually the point. The point is kind of linguistic and cultural and about how we know what we know. So strictly speaking, datum is the singular form and data is the plural form. Strictly speaking, it should be data are, but we typically say data is. The data is telling us that. The data is showing us that. We never say the data are telling us that or showing us that. So this is the big data is, data are debate. And it's not just some arcane academic debate. It actually raged across mainstream and social media, especially since several big media outlets like The Guardian had to decide whether or not to queer data by subverting its plural grammatical origins, right? So you're probably looking at an example of what happened when this debate went online and people had to decide whether we say data is or data are. Eventually, data is what's won, and Oxford Dictionary basically said this is a mass noun, which also I had no idea any such thing existed. But I think the bigger question is really, why does any of this matter? Who cares whether data is singular or plural, right? So writes scholar Daniel Barker, what could be forgiven as a minor grammatical mistake might actually be a microcosmic example of a modern cultural phenomenon. We no longer seem to know the difference between data, knowledge, and information, and that is a dangerous thing. So there's a saying, when money talks, nobody listens to the grammar. It shows the power of money. It shows the power of the idea of money. And it's pretty much the same with data. When we talk about data, nobody listens to the grammar. Again, it shows the power of the idea of data and how it's taken over our ways of thinking and seeing, or our ways of knowing actually in the last 50 plus years, which is when we used the term data much, much more. And how it's taken over sort of the whole idea of knowing. So think about it. In an earlier age, we would say, how do you know that? This has now been replaced with, what data do you have to support that? So that is actually the point that I was trying to make, that words have power. And the way we use words reveals the power of the underlying ideas they express. And as we know, the power of data has grown immensely with the rise of digital devices, computers, and the internet. So again, to quote Barker, who said that the advent of computers has turned data into the digital equivalent of snow, something that's essentially sort of out there, amorphous, uncountable, and easier to refer to in aggregate. Something fundamental has shifted when the boundary between data, information, and knowledge gets blurred to the point of oblivion, when the part becomes the whole, greater than the sum of its parts. So when we come to sort of the whole question of knowledge or knowing, how do we know ourselves now? What does it mean to take the saying, know thyself, and apply it today? One part of it is through measurement or data, or through what is called the quantified self, or I measure, therefore I am. So I wanted to give you an example of sleep. Imagine you had a night of deep sleep with pleasurable dreams, erotic dreams, wet dreams maybe. Imagine your Fitbit or your measurement device or the data told you the exact opposite. No, you didn't have a good night's sleep. Your performance in bed didn't measure up to the average. You slept less hours, your REM sleep was weaker, blah, 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 blah. So again, I think we come back to sort of fundamental questions about the relationships between pleasure and data, right? Pleasure is subjective. Data may be whatever it is, but it pretends to be objective. When I hear the words or the word data, I think numbers, I think Excel sheets, and I think dry. And strangely enough, we often trust the knowledge we get from data more than we trust the experience of our bodies. There's lots and lots and lots of examples, but I really wanted to stick with the sleep one. So I think the thing is that if we really think of data as something that's kind of dry and a kind of knowledge, right, that is numerical, I guess the question is really like, how do we undry data? How do we wet data? How do we, now that the data beast has woken up, how do we sort of pat it back to sleep so that we're not slaves to data and that our embodied experiences, our pleasures, our messiness, all of that, right, can come into knowing, into information, the ways we know ourselves. How do we make it? As the information is beautiful team says, juicy. How do we make it juicy data? I wanted to leave you with this lovely visual and with this whole question about the tangle between data, information, knowledge, ways of knowing, and really putting pleasure into that and saying, how can we move this dry thing to something that is juicy, to something that actually makes us smile, something that gives us joy? That would be the twin of data. Thanks.